Hey guys, today we're talking about the election of 1840 and the presidencies that followed. The election of 1840 included two men running for president. We had Martin Van Buren, the current president. He was running for the Democrats, and we have William Henry Harrison running for the relatively newer political party, a party referred to as the Whigs. So William Henry Harrison versus Martin Van Buren, the incumbent president. And here are their pictures here. Okay, let's get started. Objective question today. Why was John Tyler an unpopular president? Interesting. Didn't mention him just now, but that tells you something about where this is going. All right. So, the election of 1840, the Whigs, which were a kind of new formed party, a kind of people left over who didn't like the Democrats, who never liked the Democrats, kind of cobbling together this new political party so we can get back to a two-party system. They knew that their biggest weakness was going to be losing voters to the Democrats, because the Democrats were flocking in masses to the Democratic Party because they were so, they identified as, the common man, right? The people on the frontier, the people in the West. And the Whigs knew that they were losing a lot of potential voters there. So what they needed to do was balance their ticket. And the way they did that is they selected William Henry Harrison, which in their minds, was an elevated individual, what you would think of as like a federalist kind of man. And then we paired him with another man named John Tyler, and that's his picture right there. John Tyler was from the South, and the Whigs thought that by putting a Southerner on their ticket, it would help balance out William Henry Harrison, and it would give their ticket more of a common man vibe and give them a better chance at beating Martin Van Buren. Now, John Tyler had been a Democrat in the past. However, when the nullification crisis occurred, we remember that. That's when South Carolina said that they could nullify a tariff if they didn't like it, and Andrew Jackson said, no, you can't, and South Carolina said, well, maybe I'll just leave the country, and then Andrew Jackson talked about hanging Calhoun. It was like this big thing, right? And John Tyler got really upset about how Andrew Jackson and the Democrats handled that. And since then, he had left the Democratic Party, and now he's kind of like a pseudo Whig. Okay, so he's kind of a table jumper, but now some Democrats might be able to kind of identify with him and say, okay, well, he used to be a Democrat, maybe I could used to be a Democrat too. A brief review of what the two kind of political parties wanted. The Democrats favored state rights. They liked the strict interpretation of the Constitution. They believed that the people are the people with the power. They liked the idea of the common man, that your average everyday person should be able to vote and make a difference in government. If we rewind and think back to the early political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, the Democrats now really kind of represent those early original Democratic Republicans. Think Thomas Jefferson and his ideas when you think about the Democrats now. All right, so that's the one party. The second party are the Whigs. And if you think back in time, these are similar to the old school Federalists. So like John Adams, okay? Alexander Hamilton, right? Let's see what they liked. They liked a national government that was powerful. The ability for one country, one area of government to make decisions for a majority of the country. They wanted a national bank, high protective tariffs. There's a lot of manufacturing in the Whig Party. Internal improvements, some reforms, prohibition and abolition. We haven't talked much about those. We'll talk about those next week. But the Whigs, and this is obviously a very, very broad, generalization, right? There are certainly Whigs that are pro-slavery. There are certainly Whigs who are anti-prohibition. There are certainly Whigs who don't really love tariffs. But for the most part, a majority of them fall into these, party platforms. All right. So both of the parties, of course, depend on the masses, the common man. Both of these parties have groups of individuals that support them in the North, the South, the West, the like super frontier, and they're both kind of promoting the idea of nationalism and stuff. Now, William Henry Harrison is going to utilize something called the Log Cabin Campaign. And that was something that kind of fell into his lap. Let's talk about how. William Henry Harrison at this point is very old. When he's running for president, he's 67 years old. And nowadays, if you're 67, you might have some life left in you. But back then, 67 is ancient. If he's elected, he'll be the oldest president to ever be elected, right? So the Democrats are kind of making fun of him, saying, ha ha ha, he's ancient, he's probably going to die, right? And this is a famous quote from the Democrats. It says, give him a barrel of hard cider, so that's alcohol, and a pension of $2,000 a year, and he will sit the remainder of his days in his log cabin. Okay, I'm kind of trying to see the insult here. This doesn't really sound that bad. And so the Whigs said, yeah, you're right. Actually, that's exactly what William Henry Harrison would do, because he's the log cabin and hard cider candidate. And they embraced this and used it in their favor by saying, yeah, this guy is so down to earth, he's so chill, he's such a good representation of the people, because he literally lives in a log cabin and he drinks hard cider. And every single common man in the country is like, well, hot dang, I live in a cabin, and hot dang, I love me some hard cider. And more people start to identify with William Henry Harrison, because the Whigs have taken this insult and turned it into a campaign. It's genius. The people love it. They also depict Martin Van Buren as this wealthy snob who's, out of touch with everything and doesn't really understand the struggles of the common man. The reason this is so ingenious and so ironic is because, in reality, William Henry Harrison is very, very wealthy. And yes, he technically lives in a log cabin, but it's a mansion made out of logs, right? He's very, very wealthy, and in reverse, right, Martin Van Buren's actually, the one who started from the very, very bottom of society. He was born to very, poor, impoverished farmers, and actually rose through the ranks. So the reason it's ironic is it's the exact opposite of what's actually going on. This campaign, we also see a lot of paraphernalia get made. So these were stamps, log cabin stamps. This is how you would support William Henry Harrison. We also have buttons, excuse me. We got some teapots and stuff. So we got election swag for the first time, right? Cool. Harrison also travels the country campaigning for himself, literally just takes trains and rides from place to place and gives these spiels, these kind of sale pitches over and over again. He says, listen, are you guys tired of, being in a bad economy? Everyone says, yeah. He goes, okay, well, that's Martin Van Buren's fault. I'm going to fix it. And they say, how? And he goes, I am. And then everyone goes, woo! Right? Because he's purposely avoiding all the really, really controversial stuff that politicians need to talk about at this point, right? So slavery doesn't touch anything on slavery. The voters have no idea how he feels on slavery, which for him is good, because no matter what he feels, everyone thinks he's on their side. Tariffs, nobody knows how he feels about tariffs, but that's okay. So far, he hasn't said something I don't like. National banks, hasn't even touched on that, right? So all of these topics that usually would turn voters off or give them something to criticize, he purposely does not address. So he's looking more and more appealing. He also had these giant balls. All right, so William Henry Harrison used giant victory balls, and they were these enormous 10-foot leather and tin balls that they would roll from campaign stop to campaign stop. And they would have a phrase on it. And they would have like William Henry Harrison for president, right? And all these different things written on it, and they would roll them as he's traveling around. And this is where the phrase "keep the ball rolling" comes from, because as these giant victory balls would roll into town, everyone would start cheering, "Yay, we love him!" And they would continue to push them on. So "keep the ball rolling" comes from William Henry Harrison's giant balls. Also, there's some good campaign songs. You'll look at that later. Election of 1840 results. We see a lot of purple on this map. William Henry Harrison does well. William Henry Harrison gets 80% of the electoral vote. Nice. Poor Van Buren does not win. This is important because this is the first time the Democrats are going to be out of the office in 12 years. So for over a decade, the Democrats have controlled the presidency? No longer. Also, because we've been relaxing our requirements for voting and also the rise of the common man, 80% of eligible voters are going to vote in this election. That's huge compared to about 50% today on average. So William Henry Harrison becomes the president of the United States. John Tyler becomes the vice president. Now, William Henry Harrison, super excited to give his inaugural address. He goes out into the really, really cold, kind of rainy day without a coat, and he talks for over 2 hours to the crowd, right? And this is the time before microphones, so the crowd has no idea what he's saying. They're just watching this old guy talk. And it's kind of miserable, but they're there, so they're embracing it, right? But for over 2 hours he talks, and then he gets sick. And unfortunately for the Whigs, who fought so hard to get a president in the White House, William Henry Harrison dies. He was president for 31 days. Well, all right, when the president dies, we know what happens. The vice president becomes president. So here's John Tyler. So our objective question, remember, is asking about him. So why was John Tyler an unpopular president? Let's find out. John Tyler, remember, is not a Whig, right? He's basically an ex-Democrat. He was brought into the Whig ticket to kind of balance it, and now he's the president. So he's not a Whig, so he's not going to hold up any of what William Henry Harrison was planning to do. So the Whigs start to get really, really frustrated because all the stuff they want to do, Tyler's doing the opposite. Because, plot twist, he's actually not a member of their party. So his entire cabinet, except for one man named Webster, resigns because they're so frustrated that their president is not doing the things that they think he should be doing. He's not doing any of the Whig stuff. And then Tyler basically is a man without a party because, remember, he also left the Democrats a couple years ago. So the Democrats think he's a traitor, a turncoat, right? They're done with him. The Whigs are mad because he's not doing anything that he's supposed to be doing. So literally, we have a president in the White House who has absolutely no political party and is just sitting around doing whatever he wants, and it's frustrating both sides. One major thing that happens under John Tyler's presidency is we do get a firmer border with Maine. That man I mentioned that didn't resign, named Webster, is going to help create this treaty with Canada, so we have an official border between Maine and Canada. So that happens. There you go. Cool. Last major thing, immigration. Excuse me. Immigration is going to spike around this time period, and especially specific waves are going to start kind of grinding people the wrong way. Over 5 million immigrants are going to be rushing in at this point. That's partially due to the first industrial revolution, all the jobs, all the land that exists in the United States, manifest destiny. A variety of reasons are drawing immigrants in. And a lot of immigrants have a tough time. The largest wave of immigrants at this point in American history are the Irish, all right? So coming from Ireland, that area around the UK, you know where that is. Right. What's going on in Ireland is the potato famine. If you were with me in world history, you remember this, where all the potatoes are have this fungus in them, so they're not edible. But remember that over 80% of the average Irish diet at this point is potatoes. So now there's no food, there's no nothing. So they're showing up in America very, very desperate, unskilled, and a lot of people in America are getting frustrated with this. The second largest group are the Germans. Right? Now, why is it important that they're Irish and German? Well, they're two different groups, and they're different than the Americans that are already in our country. Remember that a majority of Americans at this point are Protestants. Well, the majority of the immigrants coming over, Irish and Germans, are Catholic. So this is a whole nother religion, and there's a lot of clashing there. This is going to cause a rise in nativism. Nativism is kind of like nationalism, but focused more on individual people. So it's the idea that if you're native to a country, you're better. And the Americans at this point, ironically, right, consider themselves native instead of, the Native Americans. So anyway, nativism begins to rise and the American Party forms. Now, this is a political party. They're way less powerful than the two major ones at this point, but they do gain some traction. The American Party gets together and says, we'll never vote for a non-American. And at that point, that means a Catholic, right? So they get together, they rally together. However, membership's a secret. So when anyone asks, hey, are you in the American Party? You're supposed to say, I know nothing about that. I have no idea. I don't know anything. So they get nicknamed the Know-Nothings. And they'll gain a little bit more traction next week when we talk about abolition and reforms and stuff like that. But for now, just know that there's another party on the rise, the American parties, nicknamed the Know-Nothings. All right, so we have a huge Russian immigrants, we have a lot of nativism going on, and we also have a president who refuses to do anything his party wants him to do. Alrighty, use that and answer your objective question, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.